Hello and welcome to Artifacts, a living archive dedicated to preserving the first-person stories of queer, avant-garde, and underground culture, told by those who lived it. Today's episode is part of Behind the Scenes, a series spotlighting the visionary arts administrators, curators, and cultural workers who shaped the ecosystems that made experimental art possible. In this episode, we're honored to present our conversation with Martha Wilson, a pioneering performance artist, publisher, and arts administrator whose impact on downtown New York cannot be overstated. After arriving in the city in 1974, Wilson recognized that the explosive growth of artists' books and performance art had no institutional home. In response, she founded Franklin Furnace in 1976, an alternative space that launched or supported the early careers of Jenny Holzer, Barbara Kruger, Lorraine O'Grady, Karen Finley, Eric Bogosian, and countless others. Alongside her administrative work, Wilson developed a groundbreaking body of feminist performance, photography, text, and video. She was also a member of Disband, the all-female conceptual no-wave performance group. This interview offers an intimate look into Wilson's creative evolution, her founding of one of the most important alternative spaces in New York, and her singular contributions to feminist and performance art.
We were talking about the Skinner box. This is the Skinner box here. This is my mother holding me in front of the Skinner box. Many years later, my therapist pointed out to me that if I was a baby in a Skinner box, they didn't want me to crawl on the floor. It was going to be freaking cold in the winter. I was born in December. So they put me in the Skinner box. But if I wanted my mother, I had to perform my needs for her to come over and pick me up. Hence, I became a performance artist and I live in storefronts. Seems pretty obvious now. People ask me all the time if I ever read Judith Butler, and I said, no. Maybe she read me, I don't know. I didn't base my work on any theories. I based it all on my experience as a woman living in the world. Use of language sets me apart from Cindy Sherman, who did portraits in all kinds of guises, but she never uses language. She wants you to project your language onto her image and make of it what you want. And I was doing experiments. I was finding out who was in there. So I was using language to say, this is me, a woman, dressing as a man, to find out what it's like to be dressing himself in drag and to appear like a woman. But we have to provide the background, which is the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War is raging. It's been raging for years, and it's now 1969, and I'm graduating from college. My boyfriend, same age, is graduating from college. He doesn't want to get drafted. I was raised a Quaker. We decided to move to Canada. Our painting teacher in college, he called and said, look, this is the coolest art school in North America. And Richards said, okay, we're there. We moved to Halifax. He enrolls in to get an MFA in printmaking, and I enroll at Dalhousie University, which is literally across the street, in the English literature program, because I'm too chicken to call myself an artist. So I get to graduate school. I'm in the English literature program, but the coolest art school in North America is across the street, and they're inviting Vito Conchi, Dan Graham, John Baldessari, Joseph Kosuth, Joseph Beuys, Peter Kubelka, Lawrence Weiner, Ian Wilson. All of the conceptual artists of the day are coming through the school. Well, visual art can be made out of language. Oh my God, this is fantastic. I can be an artist because I can use language, which is, what I'm studying, what my tool is. So I'm in Nova Scotia now. I want to be an artist. I went to Jerry Ferguson, who was the painting teacher who had been hired by the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. And I said, look, Jerry, I want to be an artist. He said, women don't make it in the art world, but if you're serious, you'll make black and white art. So I walked across the street and bought a roll of color film and started doing performance art, basically, and having people photograph me. And the work had texts associated, and I'm just going to read one of them. This is a piece called Posturing Age Transformation, 1973. I am a 25-year-old artist trying to look like a 50-year-old woman who is trying to look like she is 25. I was extremely uncomfortable, dressed up like a middle-aged female, which I take to be an index to how much fear I have of past 30 status in society. So I was, as other feminists were also, I was questioning what this instrument of my woman's body was up to. I also dressed in drag, so I'm a woman changing myself into a man who's trying to look like a woman. I wore fake hair, fake eyelashes, fake fingernails, but not fake boobs, because I already had the boobs. These were, my performance works were experiments in what it means to be a woman. Lucy Lepard, lucky for me, came to the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, looked at my work, said, yes, you are an artist. And then she said, I'm going to put you in a show. The show was called Circa 7500. It started in Valencia, California, population circa 7,500. The catalog was 4x6 note cards. We got the front and back of each one card as our page in the catalog. Through this catalog, I met other women who were living in New York. So when my boyfriend dumped my ass, I decided to move to New York to find out if I really was an artist. So I moved to New York, and I don't have a place to live. But Simone Forti had, perhaps unwisely, said, if you ever decide to move to New York, you can crash on me. So I called Simone on the phone and said, I'm moving to New York, and I crash on you. And I lived with Simone for 30 days, on a mattress on the floor. She had a beautiful loft at 537 Broadway, famously a part of Judson Dance Theater, along with Yvonne Rainer. There was a downtown community already. I guess 10th Street, there were a lot of artists living on 10th Street. By the time I got there, the clock tower had been established by Alana Heiss in Tribeca. Dan Graham told me, go and look at this clock tower. This is important for you to understand. I was working at Harry and Abrams in publishing, so I would go downtown to the Idea Warehouse, which Alana also founded. It was on Reed Street, giant loft. Charlemagne Palestine is playing a piano, and he's playing it so hard that the strings of the piano are crawling out onto the floor. Virginia Pearsall is wearing roller skates, and she's got an 8mm film projector strapped to her body, one facing forward and one facing backwards. So she's showing film on her body, rolling around in the loft. So the image is getting bigger, getting smaller as she's rolling around in the loft. I was so thrilled to be, watching the downtown art scene. Artists were doing everything. Not painting and sculpture necessarily. They were doing broadsides, posters, graffiti. Jenny Holzer was putting giant inflammatory essay posters on the street. Artists were publishing. Lawrence Weiner had published statements in 1969. It was a booklet that fit in your pocket, and it cost $1.95. It was cheap stuff available for regular people to consume, not people who buy painting and sculpture. No, we're talking about regular, real world people. Artists are doing events out on the street, or they're performing in clubs, or they're performing in the Idea Warehouse on Reed Street. I was thinking about trying to start an art space, talking to Jackie all the time about this. The person who was doing the work closest to mine was Jackie Apple. Jackie made an appointment with Ivan Karp. Ivan Karp was the director of O.K. Harris Gallery on Lower West Broadway. So Jackie showed Ivan her work, and Martha showed Ivan her work. And then he started yelling. He started saying, "Why are you showing me this work? This work is terrible. I would never show this work." So Jackie and I decided to show at least 50% women at Franklin Furnace. Franklin Furnace was in the business of showing artists who were creating what came to be known as postmodern expression. We didn't call it that. We were just downtown people. We were doing stuff. I took my artist book to the Museum of Modern Art because they had already done the information show in 1970. This is now 1976, 75. And I said, "Can you sell my artist book to the public?" And the manager of the store said, "Look, lady, your book costs $5, but my bookkeeping cost would be $5, so I'm not going to handle your book." So I thought, oh. So there are probably other artists in the same boat as I am who have these artist books that they've made and they don't know what to do with them. So actually, a friend of mine stole the mailing list from Alana Heiss, who had founded the Institute for Art and Urban Resources. Now at the same time, Lucy Lepard, Saul LeWitt, Pat Steer, Robin White, Walter Robinson, Edith Diak, a bunch of artists are, Mimi Wheeler, anyway, are forming Printed Matter. But I'm a solo individual, so I can go downtown and incorporate myself. But the idea that we came up with, Lucy and I together, was I have a storefront. You know, why don't you come and share space in this storefront? We'll do this bookstore project together. So Printed Matter comes over, and we're all meeting in the store, and Willoughby comes down the elevator with Bob Projansky, his attorney. And Willoughby says, "This will never be known as the Printed Matter building." There was a lot of yelling in those days. I don't know, people don't do that anymore, do they? You know, as this was all happening, we're dissecting the pie differently. I was going to be a bookstore, an archive, and then they said, "No, we want to publish and distribute artist books." And I'd been standing in line at the post office enough to know I don't want to be mailing shit all the time. So I said, "Yeah, you sell, you can sell and publish, and I will exhibit and preserve." So I wrote to everybody in the art world and said, "I bet you have these artist books under your bed and you don't know what to do with them. But I'm going to open a bookstore and you're going to be able to sell them to the public." I was living on a ground floor loft in Tribeca on Franklin Street, and I was going to call this organization the Franklin Stove. But Willoughby Sharp, who had found this building and we net leased it together, lived on the top floor, he came downstairs and he talked to me and said, "You should call it Franklin Furnace." And he was absolutely correct. That name stuck immediately. And the legal name of the organization is Franklin Furnace Archive, Inc. It's open as a bookstore, and we were selling stuff. My roommate built trestle tables, like the police use these barriers, trestle barriers. So they're tables with a plank of plywood, which I painted on the top. We had 200 titles on opening day, which was April 3rd of 1976. Nobody stole anything. It was amazing to me that there were as many as 200. There was no clear demarcation in the field between artists who are making one-of-a-kind objects and artists who are doing published stuff. So we sold the published stuff and we exhibited the one-of-a-kind. We were not only selling artist books, we were collecting them and exhibiting them, and we were showing both one-of-a-kind and editioned artist books. And the one-of-a-kind stuff started to crawl up the walls and across the ceiling and turned into installation practice. And then Martine Abelea, French artist who was living in New York, asked, "Can I read from my artist book?" And Jackie said, "Yeah, that sounds wonderful." So she showed up in a costume. Aha. So the performance art program was born. And then when Willie Cole did an installation at Franklin Furnace, he had an audio tape that was projected out on the street, on Franklin Street. He covered the facade of Franklin Furnace with cardboard cutouts of Nelson Mandela, who had been in solitary confinement at this point for 25 years already. And the audio tape was Mandela, 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 Mandela. So there were artists who were using the street also, who were taking performance art outside so that regular people could experience it. Our job was to show artists before they got famous. They were so-called emerging artists. And the way we got on the map was we invited artists who were already well-known and famous, like William Wegman, to read. I originally thought that the performance art program would be called Artists Reading, not making the jump yet to the idea of performance. So Franklin Furnace also had meetings with Printed Matter. Printed Matter was founded by a collective of people: Lucy Lepard, Saul DeWitt, Pat Steer, Walter Robinson, Edith Diak. They wanted to open a bookstore for artist books. And by this point, I had been standing in line at the post office enough to know that distribution was kind of a drag. So I said, "Okay, sounds good. You take distribution and publication, I'll take exhibition and preservation of the artist book field." And that we remain today, both of us in business, doing, they're selling the artist books and I'm preserving them. I didn't think I knew enough, and I didn't want my taste to be the arbiter of the Franklin Furnace program. So in 1980, Jackie moves to Los Angeles and we start a peer review process whereby artists would submit their proposals for their installation, performance, or whatever. And then we would get together once a year and look at all the proposals, and they would pick the program. The artists are the practitioners and the ones who are creating the future of art. And so they're saying, "I'm gay, AIDS is important, we're going to show this performance artist who's doing a piece about AIDS." This is 45 years later now. Franklin Furnace still uses a peer review process to pick the program, because then the program is responsive to what the community of artists is evolving and thinking. And feminism was a big place. When I got to New York, the scene was comprised of many different feminist groups. For example, there was the gang that started AIR Gallery in 1972. Bunches of artists formed collectives that would then work on issues of Heresies magazine, one of which was the Goddess issue. So it was all women, but the issues could be different depending on what that group of women was interested in. For example, I was in the satire issue of Heresies magazine. And the first thing that happened to me when I got to New York was Judy Stein, publisher of Women Artists News, took me under her wing and took me to various consciousness-raising groups. The consciousness raising was basically talking freely about whatever it was that was of concern. You did not interrupt the person who was talking. They were able to just say whatever it was for as long as they needed to say it. And then there'd be discussion later. It was very liberating to be able to complain and crap out about life as a female in contemporary society. There were other collectives. For example, on the West Coast was Chrysalis magazine, the Women's Building. Basically, Judy Chicago, Miriam Shapiro founded the Feminist Art Institute inside the gymnasium of the California Institute of the Arts because none of the artists were using the gym. I took my work and made an appointment with the Feminist Art Institute to show my work to these young feminists. Judy Chicago was in the room, and I showed my work, and then Judy Chicago said, well, what do you think of what you see here? And around the frieze, the top, above the seats in the gymnasium, were tits and flowers painted directly on the wall. Well, I thought that was horrifying, but I didn't want to use the word horrifying, so I said, it looks derivative to me. Oh my God, she lost it. She started yelling at the top of her lungs, don't you understand what we're trying to do here? We're trying to support these young women. And I was without defenses, and I started to cry. Judy Chicago made me cry. Collective activity was a practice, and it was a new practice. In Halifax, for example, the women competed with each other. They were solo artists trying to make it in the system. So they weren't binding together. I didn't discover collective action until I got to New York, and there were all these consciousness-raising groups, and there are all these collectives creating magazines. And did the collective sense exist among men? I'm going to say no. It still doesn't. I don't see men collaborating in groups, to publish magazines and stuff. They might own a group of people who publish a magazine, but they don't. The other thing that's very important, which the Guerrilla Girls figured out in 1985, is how many feminists does it take to change a light bulb? That's not funny, is the punchline. Feminism of the 70s was fucking serious. In the 80s, the Guerrilla Girls figured out if we could make people laugh at things, even though you may not agree, you can at least hear the other side. As I understand it, the Guerrilla Girls work collectively. So ideas are discussed among multiple brains, and then a graphic is prepared out of that concept, whatever that concept is that the poster is about. One of their posters is, you're seeing less than half the picture without the view of women and artists of color. So the graphics were always great, and they were put up in the vagina of the art world on West Broadway in 1985 as posters that you could look at. They were not available for sale. They were freely available to the public to get the concepts out there. It's another example of the products of a collective process and collective gathering of brains that I think characterized feminism in the, certainly starting in the 70s, but then cranking up in the 80s. And now that we're online, everybody's talking to everybody, which is it's a new world out there. So I started a band, an all-girl band of women artists who couldn't play any instruments, called Disband. Disband was active from 1978 to 1982, and what was so great about it was we'd have a topic, something we wanted to talk about. Sadness. How do you express sadness? I expressed sadness. Sad, 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 sad.
Sad, 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 sad.
Diane expressed sadness. Being taken care of. Donna expressed sadness. Mommy! Alona expressed sadness. Kill my landlord. I want to kill my landlord. I want to kill my landlord. Disband was not about competence. Disband was about expression. We had another song, Every Day, Same Old Way. We had a song about nuclear power and how radiation was going to kill us. It was about contemporary political and social issues that affected our lives and our futures. Performance art as a term hadn't been invented yet. When Vito Conci was masturbating under a platform at Sanaben Gallery in 1972, it was called body art, which is a term I much prefer because the body is your instrument. The art is the idea that you're expressing with your instrument. Vito was following people home. He was waiting at the bottom of stairs with a lead pipe, blindfolded. He was doing stuff that was bodily dangerous for the participants. And so performance art was often inside that loft, although sometimes it went out on the street and got into a cab and rolled away, or sometimes it was durational, and you would come and look at it as long as you could stand it. For example, Mona Hatoum, Palestinian artist, 1984, I believe, put herself in a clear body bag on a table and then put guts and kidneys and intestines and hearts and organs in the bag with her. And that was it. She was inside this body bag, and you came in the performance space and you sat down and looked, and then you stayed as long as you could stand it, and then you left. It wasn't theater. It was concept in real time that sometimes looked like theater, so there was a lot of confusion. When Laurie Anderson did United States at BAM, she confused it further because she would borrow theatrical techniques freely while using performance art techniques as well. Rosalie Goldberg came up with the term visual art performance, but the term that stuck was performance art. After my hair grew out gray, the first piece I did after that was as Bill Clinton. I saw a photograph of Bill Clinton in the New York Times magazine, so I cut it out, and then I had my hair cut in his hairstyle and wore the black suit and the same tie, and had a photographer take my portrait. They're shown side by side, and the name of the piece is Name Equals Fate. His name was William Jefferson Clinton. My name is Martha Story Wilson. I'm named after a guy named Thomas Story, who was a Quaker who went around the Eastern Seaboard cataloging all the Quaker meetings in 1732 or something like that. What I've done is I've basically told stories throughout my career. Presented my stories and presented other people's stories. That this is how we can grasp ideas. But while I was in France anyway, Muriel Anjaran, who is the director of FRAC Marseille, wanted to show my work at FRAC. So I took a trip to Marseille, and I showed her everything I'd ever done. And she said, I want to do all of your work about aging. And I said to myself, I have never thought about that as a category, but here this outside curator is looking at it and saying, you have been discussing aging since 1973, and it's 50 years later, and you're still doing this work. The first work of visual art that I ever made was called Breast Forms Permutated. I was living in Halifax, and I took photographs of boobs in the English department and at the art school. And in the English department, the women all wore brassieres, so they had strap marks in the photographs. But at the art school, nobody wore brassieres, so there are no strap marks. So we know that all the boobs are from the art school. And it's a grid, and it's a joke, actually, about permutating. The conceptual artists of the 1970s were, for example, Sol LeWitt would draw every horizontal line between point A and point B. I decided to permutate boobs, which are limitless. There's no way to limit this form, as a kind of a joke on this practice of the conceptual white male conceptual artists of the 70s. Painted Lady is a piece about whether makeup is something that enables expression or is it a mask that prohibits expression. And I decided in Painted Lady that actually the wig, the false eyelashes, the eyeshadow enabled expression before and after. A portrait of my torso in 1973 and a portrait of my torso in 2009. I make up the image of my perfection. I make up the image of my deformity. I used makeup to make myself as beautiful as possible and to make myself as ugly as possible. I'd been a redhead for half of my life, from age 30 to age 60. And during that time, I had started to go gray, but I didn't really know if I was all gray or... I took a photograph every month for a year as my hair was growing out from red to gray. Then I have gray hair, and I'm walking around on Fifth Avenue in Brooklyn, and somebody bumped into me. I'm a gray-haired old lady. I'm invisible. So I did a piece called Invisible, where I went across the street to Paul's store and blend in with I become invisible. I disappear in the environment. The fate of old women is that they become invisible. This one is called New Wrinkles on the Subject. I hired a makeup artist to enunciate all of my wrinkles. And she is a makeup artist, so she was doing a really lovely job of doing very fine lines. I said, no, you don't understand. I want to see all the wrinkles. I want to emphasize the wrinkles. Then later, I did a work called More Wrinkles on the Subject, which shows wrinkles under my arm and on my legs and my neck. And then the subtitle is Thanks to John Copeland's. I was outside the center of the art world, but it felt all right. It felt okay to be stuck out there. The punchline is, it's the job of the artist to stand slightly outside and look in the window and critique what the rest of the society is. That is our job description.
Artifacts is a free oral histories platform. Please like, subscribe, and visit our website, www.artifacts.movie, for an ad-free, interactive experience with bonus content. If you're able, please make a tax-deductible donation at www.artifacts.movie/donate. Hit the link on screen to watch another Artifacts interview.